Okay, so we'll start today's meeting. I would like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Council's website. Members, you are by now aware the need to keep your video camera switched on for the duration of the meeting and keep your microphones muted except when I invite you to speak. Please click the raised hand function if you wish to ask a question or comment, and I will invite you into the meeting. There's always a risk that there will be technical problems, and I would ask for your patience if we do incur this. If we do incur it, I'll declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed and the public broadcast will be paused. If it is not possible to address the problem, the meeting may need to be abandoned and reconvened at a later date, but we'll cross that bridge if necessary. Please also note that to facilitate discussion, I intend to waiver the committee procedure rule limiting members' contributions to 5 minutes. I also propose to allow members to speak more than once on each item if appropriate. However, please make your contributions concise and to the point. Finally, I would remind members and officers that all virtual meetings are being recorded. Okay, so we'll move to agenda item number 1, which is apologies for absence. I have received apologies from Flavio Vitesse, representing the Roman Catholic Diocese of East Anglia. Tamar, have we got any apologies? I think I can see everybody, but I'm not aware of any.
No other apologies at the moment, no.
Okay, and we're just currently waiting for Councillor Downs to join us, but I'm going to begin just to confirm everybody's here. So if you could just say you're present and then mute your microphone following that. So Councillor Ambrose Smith.
Present.
Councillor Downs is joining us. We'll see him pop up when he joins us. Councillor Every.
Present.
Councillor Hay.
Present.
Councillor Hoy.
Present.
Councillor Netzinger.
Present.
Councillor Simon Taylor.
Present.
Councillor Whitehead.
Present.
Councillor Wisson.
Present.
And we've got Andrew Reid representing the Church of England Diocese of Ely, who's the co-opted member.
Present.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, and also myself. So thank you very much. We'll move to declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare a disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? No, I can't see anybody, but as always, if something does come up and you want to bring it to my attention, if you use the raised hand function. We'll move to minutes of the meeting on the 23rd. We've been asked to approve the minutes of the 23rd of June 2020 as a correct record. Can I ask if any member who does not agree with this proposal to click the raised hand function on the right of your screen now? Okay, there doesn't appear to be any disagreement or dissent in relation to that. So on that recommendation, we'll carry that as approved, and I'll sign a hard copy once we get back into the office. Okay, agenda item 4, action log. An updated action log was circulated in the published papers for this meeting. If any member has a question on the action log, would they raise the hand function now on the screen? Okay, so no members have indicated they want to speak in relation to this, so we'll take the action log as noted. Petitions, item 5, and public questions. We've received no public questions or petitions, so we'll move on to key decisions, agenda item number 6. We'll now move to the item of housing-related support services. Can I ask, I think we've got Lisa Sparks here who's going to present the paper. Lisa, can you now present the paper and introduce the report, please?
Okay, thank you. Right, good afternoon, everybody. The paper this afternoon, we're seeking approval for an extension on some contracts. The reason for this is since we came to committee in January, unfortunately COVID-19 has had quite a large impact on our timetable for delivering the changes for the housing related support services. Providers have unsurprisingly needed to actually focus all their efforts on responding to the pandemic, and therefore we've had to pause all of the work relating to market and stakeholder engagement, as it would have been inappropriate to carry it on at this time. this has of course meant that there's actually an inevitable delay to our timetable, and we've not actually been able to undertake the work to develop the new service models for us to go out to tender with. So 2.1.2 of the report sets out the areas of work that have been specifically impacted. But as we've been unable to carry out the engagement work required, there would have been significant risks of actually pursuing a tender exercise at this time. And again, we've set those out within the paper at 2.1.3. The delay in commencing the tender process does mean that we won't be able to start the new contracts from the 1st of April 2021 as planned. So hence we've come today to ask for a 9-month extension to allow us enough time to complete the work necessary to inform both the service redesign, but also just to ensure that we're also giving providers enough time to manage their COVID recovery plans as well at this time. As I say, we're requesting a 9-month extension for the services listed at 2.3.2. This will in turn mean that contracts would then commence from the 1st of January 2022. So that's a brief summary. I don't know if anyone has any questions.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Members, does anybody want to ask any questions? I think it might be useful just mentioning a similar paper went to Adults Committee, didn't it? It was approved. Lucy, you want to come in?
Only to say that it seems entirely sensible under the circumstances to extend these contracts, and I'm very happy to support it.
Thank you, Lucy. I see nobody else wants to speak. I mean, it is a quick introduction. If you want to say something, please say now. Okay, there's a quick debate. Well, I want to take on look at the recommendations. So in relation to this, so if anyone's got any objections to this, can you use the raised hand function now. Okay, so before we move to the vote, I just want to point out that as this item does not relate to the council's education function, our co-opted members do not have voting rights on this item, but I'm not going to generally take this as a vote because I think it's a unanimous decision. So if that's a consensus, I'll move to the recommendations to take them on block. Is everybody happy with that? Okay, I'll take that as carried then. So thank you very much, Lisa. We'll move on to the next. We'll move on to the next item, which is item number 7, the County Council's response to COVID-19. Officers have been asked to bring a report of COVID-19 response to date for the services for which each policy and service committee is responsible. A similar report will be brought to each future meeting until further notice. Given the rapidly changing situation and the need to provide the committee and public with the most up-to-date information possible, I've accepted this is a late report on the following grounds. Reason for lateness: to allow the report to contain the most up-to-date information possible. And the reason for urgency: to enable the committee to be briefed on the current situation in relation to the council's response to COVID-19 for those services for which it is responsible. Can I ask Jonathan Lewis, Service Director for Education, to introduce the Education Service section, and then I'll open this to debate and questions to members, and then we'll ask the Service Director Lou Williams for Children's Services to take us through his part of the report. So over to you, John, please.
Thanks, Simon. I think it's probably fair to say across the council the education update has probably been the most fluid, and we continue to receive on a daily, weekly, monthly basis new guidance from the government. And we continue to respond to that, and we've worked incredibly collaboratively to make sure that happens. I'm not intending going through the whole report, just the key things I think it's probably worth flagging. We have had confirmation from the DfE that there is no requirement for schools to fully open over the summer holidays, but instead continue to offer the normal provision they would do for families, where they provide holiday activities and other support for families. Obviously, we've received the guidance now on September opening. We will see full opening of schools from September. We had a meeting yesterday with all the primary heads. We had about 300 turn up, where we went through the more detailed elements of the proposals from government. There's a lot in there and a lot to absorb, and we're still looking at some of the questions and challenges. but obviously we're providing advice to leaders in schools to make sure that we open safely in the autumn and follow the protective measures as per the government advice that's been given. There are some challenges, particularly flag around transport. The local authority is required to meet the needs for transport, and obviously the guidance is clear that we have to keep children in what we call protected bubbles. And at the moment, we're trying to interpret how we would provide transport whilst still having the integrity of that offer. And again, we're still waiting for government guidance on how that's going to work going forward. Finally, and the last area I'll pick up, we've had the first stage of announcements around the catch-up funding for schools. So the government announced £1 billion to do catch-up for those children that have fallen behind. The first element announced is around a national tuition programme, 350 million, where there will be a range of offers open to schools to support children, particularly from deprived backgrounds, to ensure they catch up and can fully engage and get back to where they were before the COVID crisis happened. So I don't intend to cover anything else, but happy to take any questions on my report. Thank you, Simon.
Thanks, John. Members, over to you. Does anybody want to ask a question? Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a small point, Jonathan. Under special schools, the 6th bullet point says, where necessary, where appropriate, PPE. I just wondered what that was in the context of schools. What is considered to be necessary PPE?
Okay, there's two kind of exceptions. Otherwise, it's no PPE. That is for where a child has symptoms of COVID, requires isolation, and staff members can't keep a 2-metre distance from that child. So we've provided what we call grab packs. So they've had masks, aprons and gloves, which is the bare minimum they need to be able to support that child until their parent arrives. The other exception is around where schools normally would use PPE. So things like nappy changing, they may use gloves. The advice and guidance is to continue to use those if you've used them in the past. Other than that, there is no requirement for using PPE in schools.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Is there any other questions, Joan, that you want to ask? No, okay, I think you're on mute, but I saw you shaking your head, that's fine. Councillor Downs, I will take you next, but just for your reference, if you could use the raised hand function on the screen, but if you come in now and then just use that in the future. So Councillor Downs.
Thank you. Am I unmuted? Yes. Right, good. Question to Jonathan. I've been reading the documents that you've been sending out, and it's all a lot of hard work, and I recognise that and congratulate you on it. I seem to recall that you acknowledged the value of the government's roadmap for September, and I was slightly puzzled about that because I cannot see it working at all. I went into a local secondary school after school on Friday to have a conversation with the business manager and the site officer, and they showed me around the school. There were no people at the time. They showed me around the school and showed me what measures they have taken already to try to meet the requirements. And it is manifestly obvious that they cannot run the school on the present safeguarding regulations if it's full. You cannot. It is a school that has a very large intake. You can guess which one it was. And there'll be 300 pupils in a bubble. Now, I defy anybody to keep 300 pupils in a bubble during break and lunchtime and waiting for school buses and so on. It is utterly impossible. So unless there is some greater relaxation in the lockdown regulations, I do not see how we can, in all honesty, say that we're going to open the schools, other than to say to the parents, we will do the very best we can, but we cannot possibly meet the guidelines.
Okay, I think that's a fair point, Peter, and perhaps I should have acknowledged that probably the challenge of opening a secondary is bigger than the other sectors. I think primaries have been through some very challenging sets of guidance so far and are much more in the mode of delivering. And actually the flexibilities the new guidance gives them means that it should be more straightforward. What I do have to say is that throughout the guidance, it is just that, it is guidance. There is a range of protective measures that are included in there. It talks about managing distance between groups. It doesn't say you have to have distance between groups. It is a flexible set of guidance and ways of working. And ultimately, the school, as a responsible body in the case of a trust or in a maintained school, it would be the local authority, has to review their risk assessment as part of the requirements to decide whether appropriate measures are taking place. And if they can't adequately safeguard both pupils and students, staff through their risk assessment and their approaches, they'd have my full support that we look at some other way of delivering or not. Certainly the conversations I've had with some secondary heads is as they've developed their thinking, as more clarity is coming out through organisations such as ASCL providing advice, they're really getting their heads around how best to deliver. But certainly large schools, we've got some very, very large schools up to 12 form entry across the 2 local authorities that are really going to be challenged with the way you work. So things like staggered start and finish times, you're thinking of different ways of delivering things like meals at lunchtime. That is the challenge that our leaders have in schools at the moment, and they're working on it. And I'm meeting with the secondary heads tomorrow to have a conversation about where we need to seek further advice from the Department for Education.
I wish I could share. I'd want to share your optimism, Jonathan. Obviously, we want children to go back to school. I mean, let's take that for granted. But at the moment, I cannot see it happening. We looked at one particular point. The school I went into has very wisely installed a hand sanitizer outside every classroom. Now, I'm trying to picture a line of 30 pupils standing outside this classroom, one at a time, hand sanitizing to go in. Now, the time taken to do that, I mean, apart from the physical and disciplinary organization of it, the time taken will be absurd. It just cannot work. And the reason why I'm concerned is that even though they are academies and therefore they've got to sort themselves out, we as county councillors will bear the brunt of the criticism, because parents still come to us, see us, ring us up, write us and have a moan if things aren't going very well. And of course we say, well, it's an academy, etc., blah, blah, and all the usual things. But as I understand it, we as the county council still retain the ultimate responsibility for the well-being of the children's schools. Now, their health is intrinsic to well-being. Therefore, I feel that we do have a moral and a practical responsibility. And I want to know what will happen, Jonathan, if a school honestly says, look, folks, we can't do it. We cannot do it. We could do it if we did like full time from September the 2nd, whatever it is. It's not possible logistically. I'm not making a political point. I'm just talking about the practicalities of this absurd situation that we're in.
Okay, so to come back on the hand washing issue in the gel, this is where interpretation will sit behind lots of the guidance. It actually doesn't say you need to have hand washers outside every classroom to do it. It asks for a regular cleaning routine and to wash hands more thoroughly than you would normally do. So, there is an element of discretion, and schools will need to think through how that operates. But the guidance isn't explicit on how often. It just says more than regular. So having secondary age children is not very often normally. So obviously putting in place protective measures is going to be really important. I think we will work with all schools, Peter. What the role I think we've played throughout is that we've been that broker between government and schools. We've fostered conversations between different schools to share good practice. And I think, it is still very early days of this guidance. We've had it since the middle of last week. I think we've resolved a lot of issues with it. If we have a conversation tomorrow and there is real challenge around secondary schools being able to open, we'll work through that. You know, we're already talking already about thinking about, can we have a flexible opening from September? Do we have to open everyone on the first day? And my advice to schools is no. We need to get this right. We need to make sure students are ready to go into a different environment, and that may take a little bit of time. So, you know, we will communicate that clearly. And obviously, you know, I will want to talk to all the Academy Trust. You know, I meet with the CEOs every week. Andrew chairs that meeting. It's very helpful. You know, we'll thrash out these issues where we see them. And if there is a real risk and challenge to us with opening, you know, we'll take up that discussion with the regional schools commissioner, or make a good decision locally what you think is right for children. So, you know, I understand your concern. I share that concern, and you know, we'll work through those obstacles as and when we get there. What I don't want to do is say we're not going to do it, because I think there is still a lot of discussion and thinking to happen yet before we reach that point. But if we did, you know, we will support making good decisions.
Okay, thank you, John. Peter, if you could mute your microphone, please. Councillor Every.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, John. There's just 3 counts I want to say thank you on before I ask the question. First, the fact that you have been such a reliable and efficient broker between our schools and the government and the guidelines, and have obviously made huge influences there for practicalities. Also, the relationship that you've built with our academies over this period of time has been very, very effective, and I'd like to thank you for that. And the daily bulletins that come into the school, and your humour alongside your cynicism in some instances has been very, very welcome. I'd just like to ask you about the workforce changes that you've put in your report. And you said at the moment there are no critical issues currently, but then of course we don't quite know what's going to happen when everybody has to be back and on what that's likely to look at. But you have said that you're concerned about stress and anxiety in schools, and I'm wondering whether you with your work with heads and schools, whether we believe that we will get a full complement of staff back as necessary, and the impact of not, of course, and what could possibly be done if there aren't, or there isn't a full complement. Thank you.
I think you've picked a really pertinent point there to raise your question on. Obviously, we've been through huge change. You know, people struggle with change normally, let alone in the context we've been working in. We've had lots of staff absent from school because of shielding and being on critical vulnerable lists and things like that. You know, the guidance that now comes out says 1st of August, people can return to work, providing it's a COVID-safe workplace. And appropriate risk assessments are in place. So the conversations yesterday were particularly focused around that with head teachers. You know, how do we reassure people? How do we make sure we do everything we can to protect them when they do come into work? And you know, how do we provide support to them? You know, so one of the things that we've done for maintain school employees is that we've opened up the employee assistance program, which is a helpline for all our staff. They can phone and get advice and support. Guidance, counselling if they need it to come back to work. Obviously, you know, there is going to be anxiety. We fully expect in some schools that people will find it very challenging to return in September. We've encouraged head teachers to have early conversations with those that feel vulnerable. You know, put in place those discussions and support, and work with our occupational health teams if there are real challenges around why people shouldn't be there. And obviously, where medical grounds mean that people can't come back to work, absolutely we'll work with GPs and our colleagues in our EPM, our HR services to make sure that good decisions are made. But it's going to be challenging. We will have to be fleet of foot in the autumn. So some of the planning has been around, you know, where we have groups, how can we be flexible with our workforce? And fortunately, the advice for September is much more flexible with staff working across different groups of children than it had been previously, where staff were very much locked into one bubble. They now can work across more than one bubble, which will help us to mean that we can provide education whilst we support our staff back into the workplace.
Yeah, thank you. I absolutely agree. It will be challenged. They did talk about bringing back retired teachers to help out. I'm just saying, I'll be there if you need me. So
There's at least 2 of you I'm looking at here. I think could definitely come and do a job for us. 3, in fact. I think we could fill some gaps. I'll be on the phone 1st of September.
Yeah, I'll be there.
We'll take your CVs afterwards. Thank you very much, Councillor Every. Councillor Netzinger, next, please.
Thank you. So I share the concerns that have been expressed by both the other speakers so far. I have to say my chief feeling about the latest lot of guidance coming out is frustration. It's just, it appears that they seem to keep making the same mistakes, and I have to say I find it incredibly frustrating. So I share Peter's concern, particularly about the capacity to open secondary schools fully. And I think, I mean, it will be easier in some of the smaller secondaries than the really, really big ones. But for all of them, one of the reasons that I feel so frustrated about that is that I just think it's missing an important opportunity to try and do really effective blended learning. I don't think that, I think next term, in the autumn, we're going to be in a very, very uncertain place with lots of potential future lockdowns. We've seen Leicester lockdown already. We've seen pubs open one day and close the next day. I think there's not going to be much doubt about it that there will be times in Cambridgeshire next term when schools will have to close. It seems to me that we're putting a huge amount of pressure on the secondary schools to open fully when that's very difficult, and that's going to mean an enormous quantity of work for the staff involved, when actually that time and effort might be better put into creating really, really effective blended learning, which would then be very, very effective if they have to close. I mean, I think it is absolutely crucial that we make sure that every child in Cambridgeshire can be online with a decent computer and somewhere to work for the whole of next term. And I would have said that that was the top priority, much more than trying to make sure that every child is in school for every day. And if we were not saying that every child had to be in school for every day, then we would get more children in school for some of the time more effectively and effectively working at home, and we could plan for that. And I find it very frustrating that the emphasis on every child in every day is actually distracting us from making sure that that provision for online learning is there really effectively for every child when they need it. So that's one of my major frustrations, and I'm sorry for ranting about it. I understand there isn't very much you can do about it, but I would like to be reassured that our schools are making as much effort as they possibly can to make sure that every child has the capacity to work and a place to work and the resources that they need if we are locked down again in the autumn. Because while it was understandable that that was not the case for every child in April and May, if we are finding ourselves back in that position in October and we still have children who don't have the equipment and don't have a quiet place that they can go, that will have been a massive failing, not just on the government's part, but also on our part as a council. The other things that I'm kind of really worried about are actually somewhat more urgent, which is childcare over the summer, which is something else that I've talked about before. I am very pleased that schools are not being obliged to open because their staff have worked unbelievably hard since March and they need a break. But I'm extremely concerned about what kind of childcare is going to be available for key workers who really need it over the summer. And if you could give us a bit of an update on that, that would be really helpful. And I would also be very grateful to know a bit more about what's going on in the early years sector, which I know early on in the pandemic, we had huge concerns about the financial impact on many early years settings. And it would be interesting to know whether we've got indications that some of those are closing. Thank you.
Okay, I'll work down the list if that's okay, Chair. So,
that'd be great.
Yeah, carry on.
You filled a whole page up, really.
Sorry.
In terms of blended learning, obviously we're responding to government policy here, and we're still in the very early stages of understanding what it says and how we respond to it. Obviously, what it does say in that guidance is that there is a requirement on schools to have a remote learning offer that is available for all children, regardless of what happens. So, it may be a lockdown, but equally it could be a child that goes into isolation as a result of somebody in their family having COVID, or there's a localized situation around it. It could be just a class bubble closes. So schools have to have that ready, and Ofsted and others will be looking at the school's readiness to deliver against remote learning. I think our secondary schools particularly have moved on quite significantly in the last few weeks around making sure that online offers there, more online lessons. I think the flexibility in planning will lead to a greater offer that could be made around that. And it's wholly likely some schools may consider that for the short term instead of physically coming into school. I don't know. I haven't had that conversation with any leaders yet in terms of how that works. You make a really good point, though, about children's access to IT. We finally got our laptops through from the government. They're starting to be distributed now. We've got 1,300 to distribute. There are a huge amount of children out there that still won't have access to a laptop because they don't tick a particular box or a particular a characteristic that will generate them that laptop. Our schools have been fantastic. They've loaned equipment. They've found old machines. They've supported children with that significantly, but there's still not enough. One of the things that we have got coming into play is that I mentioned the £1 billion that's been announced for catch-up. 650 million of that will be distributed to schools. It could be likely that they could spend that on laptops for pupils if they choose to, but I don't know what schools are getting yet. We've got no announcement yet on how much money they're going to get, and is it enough to buy a laptop? Probably not, because it's relatively a small amount, even though it sounds a lot. It's probably around £50 to £60 per pupil, which is hardly anything in the scheme of things. In terms of childcare, we are encouraging schools to continue to provide that childcare offer. There's new guidance that's come out around the opening of provision over summer. So when term ends, schools can reset bubbles. Bubbles don't apply anymore. They restart in new groups, which is great for flexibility. We've been working very closely with PACey, who are the organisation that sort of coordinate childminders. We have a contract with them to support our childminders in the county. And at the moment, we're looking at some feasibility around supporting them financially to take more children and make a bigger offer over the summer holidays for key workers, because it's a very much untapped market. Obviously, there's still private providers running. We have encouraged schools to allow them to use premises and continue to operate. And I think the guidance that has come out last week gives that flexibility they need to be able to run. So, we're looking at that area, and we will continue to try and broker where we can as much childcare to support over the summer holidays. In terms of early years, we had our first panel yesterday. You remember I brought a proposal here to this group, or shared it with the group, around financial viability of early years providers and a grant scheme to make available to them. So we continue to look at requests. I don't think we actually granted anything yet, because we're just looking at the information that's coming in, and it will be an iterative process. It seems things have stabilised. If you looked at my report for this week, we've had a substantial increase in numbers, which should support financial viability of those provision, particularly in the centre of Cambridge, where we have more private paid-for provision coming back online. Obviously, we continue to pay full rates for all the children that are through funded hours from the local authority. So, whilst it's still a worry to me, I think it's sort of levelled out. We're not hearing closure coming through at the current time, any provision, but we keep a very close eye on that, and obviously we'll continue to talk to the sector and government about the need to provide funding, particularly for the autumn, to support them to make sure they are viable across that period, which traditionally less children attend early years settings. So I think that's covered everything.
Can I just have one quick follow-up? That's really helpful, Jonathan. Thank you. Lots of information there. You were quite encouraging about the after-school providers who might be able to go back into schools. I've definitely heard of a number who just decided a month ago that there wasn't enough information, that they weren't able to, and therefore it wouldn't be on. Would you be able to get back to me with some figures about how many, what percentage are likely to be running? Because I'd be quite interested to know.
we don't, because our role is more the oversight, not necessarily we don't work with individual providers. I will see what information we can get for you.
That'd be
happy
great.
to come back and share
Thank
that with you. And certainly I will make sure members have some details of where to go. Obviously, our family information service is a brokerage function for holiday provision. So encourage parents to call that number, and we will try and find provision and places for pupils if they need them. So I'll see what I can produce there.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Simon Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me, I'll just get back onto the report. Yeah, I just want to touch on the Fund for Pupil Catch Up again. Do we know when this is going to be, implemented to the school? And will they know how much they'll be getting per school? And also the remaining 350 million. So obviously that bit's not going to the school. So how is that going to be implemented? So how are the national tutoring programme, how is that going to be rolled out?
Okay, I think the answer to both questions is we don't yet. We've been told that schools will know their allocation, or there will be an allocation basis announced, not a school level figure, by the end of term. The money will be paid to maintain schools in August and academies in September. So the 650 million will be allocated through a methodology. I've seen deprivation or something like that, but we don't know yet, it hasn't been announced. The national tutoring programme, I've given you everything that we know. There isn't any more information than that at the moment. At the moment, they're starting the brokerage approach to getting providers to sign up to the government to deliver. We're really interested in seeing whether we could deliver some of that ourselves using our teaching schools and research schools across both local authorities and working in the region to make sure that the quality is high and we can access what we need. So obviously I'll update you when we have more information, but literally what I've given you is what we've got at the moment, and that's all that's available.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan.
Okay, Councillor Wisson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Jonathan, I just wanted to ask if there was, are we as a local authority working with schools? Because I understand that every school is individual and every school will interpret the guidance differently, possibly. But will we be working with schools to manage the expectations of parents and children as to what they can expect when they go back to school in September?
Absolutely. So throughout, I've been drafting letters for schools. So I sent through with my name on it. They've gone out to parents. Not all schools have sent them because they've done their own thing. But we have provided letters and advice for that. In the meeting I held with head teachers yesterday, we agreed what needs to go into that letter that's going out. And there'll be a final one from me before the end of term. We will cover, it's not going to be normal school. We'll cover what attendance means and how that works and what it looks like, something on the remote learning. But we will try and, give a sort of consistent message. And I didn't get any dissenting voices from the sort of themes that I said we were going to draft. So obviously I'll make sure you have a copy of that when it goes out. I'm going to suggest through the chair that I perhaps re-deliver the training I did for yesterday for schools to members, so you can hear the challenges, the issues, our interpretation of it. So you can see some more of the detail that obviously I couldn't go into in the report. And obviously we can talk about the letter and expectations during that as well.
Yeah, just while we're on that subject, John, sorry, Julie, did you want to come back in?
No, that's great, thank you.
Okay,
yeah.
Thanks. Just on that point, I think John and I had spoken about this previous to this meeting, and we're getting lots of briefings out in relation to the heads, and I thought it'd be very useful for us to have a briefing from John that he gives to our heads around Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And I'm going to propose we almost like put it on as a training plan on our training agenda plan, but ultimately we'll try and get it within the next couple of weeks, but also not only for CYP members, I think for the wider council basically, so that all council members get the opportunity to listen into John's briefing, because I've been party to this process and probably know quite a lot more than you guys. And I think John's briefing would be very useful, that we just have an hour and a half, John, to present and then maybe ask some questions, really. So we'll put that as an action onto the training agenda, and we'll sort out a date and get it out to members ASAP. Okay, so that's as an action. Tamar, if you could make a note of that. Okay, so we'll move to Councillor Hay now.
Thank you, Simon. Lucy's already asked one of the questions that I was going to ask, which was basically about out of school clubs, which I think Jonathan has already covered. And Lucy brought up the fact about online learning. I think we have to realise online learning will not suit every child. She also brought up the fact that the education establishment and the county council have a duty to ensure that every child has access to good education. I would also add, parents cannot be let off lightly. It's the parents' job as much as anything to ensure that if there is an opportunity for online learning, that their children, wherever possible, can attain to that. Unfortunately, not all parents have the financial or the educational abilities to be able to help their children do that. So in those cases, yes, as an education provider, we need to be able there to catch that. But one of the things I wanted to bring up is within the report, it says about routine Ofsted inspections will remain suspended for the autumn term. This is contradictory to what I've been reading in the paper over the weekend, where it said that Ofsted inspections would restart as normal from the beginning of the autumn term. Is this nationwide where we're saying it's going to be suspended, or is it in just part of the country?
Okay. I think there's probably a little bit of confusion with the way media's reported it. So routine legal inspections will stop until January. What it would be replaced with is inspections where there are concerns around leadership and management and safeguarding, so what we call a Section 8 inspection, that can happen. Other than that, all the Ofsted activity in the autumn term will be focused in on going in particular schools. So it does say inadequate schools they will visit, and they will visit a range of schools across the rest of the grades to understand where schools are in terms of recovery, to make sure their plans for children are supportive and will have an impact, and to help the government get some feedback on where children are and what their support is. We will not see any judgmental inspections until January. That is the difference. They will be out in schools, but they're not going to be doing what we could consider to be traditional inspections, only where there is significant concerns around leadership management and safeguarding.
Okay.
Thank you for that, Jonathan.
Thanks, Lou. I've seen you put your hand up. Did you want to come in relation to this? Did you?
Yeah, it was just to clarify that, and I'm not sure whether there's been confusion about this as well, but Ofsted has also told local authority children's services that they will restart their ILACS inspection programme from the autumn. So I don't know whether the media's perhaps conflated those two things as well. That was all.
Yeah, it's a good point. Thanks, Lou. Thank you. Okay, so we've got one more request to speak. That's Councillor Downs. Councillor Downs, you want to come back in?
Yes, thank you. It's entirely different question, but on the same broad area, and that is about the role of parents and the pressure on parents. They have seen in the press that attendance is mandatory, and some of the people in my division take the word very seriously, and they said mandatory is quite serious. And what is going to happen if, with all the best efforts that you've referred to, and which I don't doubt schools will do, what happens if a parent, perhaps with a shielded or vulnerable person in the house, decides not to send their child to school, but is very conscientious in providing them with home learning of various sorts? What are we going to do about that? Are we going to pursue them? Are we going to find them? What do you envisage? Who is going to do it? What is your thinking on that? And I'm not inventing that content. I mean, that's actually occurred as a question from a genuinely concerned, intelligent, committed parent in my division who wants to know where she stands on that delicate matter?
Okay. I think this is going to be one of the big challenging issues for the autumn. Actually, we know anxiety is high, and we also know, there are challenges around medical issues. The government are very clear, full attendance, and the expectation is that where full attendance isn't undertaken, schools use all the tools that are available to them to try and obtain that attendance. But I think I'll start by saying, fining is a last resort, and I think in the context that really does need to be the absolute last resort. And before we get into that situation, I would expect a very clear dialogue between a parent and the school about sharing those concerns, those issues, and understanding how best they can reintegrate a child. A period of integration where there is anxiety is a very sensible approach. And I'd encourage parents to talk to the school before the start of term to make sure it's clear on what support they can offer and what flexibility there is on that attendance. Equally, there is options around Flexi Schooling, as it's called. There is advice and guidance on our website about how that can work. So partially being at home, partially being at school is possible, but it is at the head teacher discretion. Obviously, we do want children in school, but where there is scenarios where that's an appropriate thing to do, that's a discretion that a head teacher has. Equally, we as a local authority, we don't decide who to fine. We find those that are referred through to us by schools. So schools do have discretion about how they approach that and whether they choose to fine or not. I guess my concern is that there may be families out there that, traditionally didn't send their children to school very often, and we use this as a reason not to. So I think it has to be a individual based assessment upon the context of that child, the context of that family, before we move into the legal realms of that approach and the way we work. Clearly, though, if a child has medical issues and a GP is supporting those medical issues, there's no grounds to fine that child is unwell and doesn't attend the school. So, I think, without saying that, we're absolutely not going to fine, I think it is the very last thing that we would do. And we would want to see that schools have fully considered the options that are available to them and worked with families before they do it. So I think, parents need to be reassured that our head teachers want that dialogue and will work with families about the best way of getting children back into school in an appropriate timescale.
Right, thank you very much. That is helpful to some extent. So the case I would in mind, for example, the mother has her own mother who is vulnerable in the house, and what she doesn't want is the child to go to school and bring back the illness, clearly. Now, what you are advising me is to tell that mother that she approaches the school and lays out specifically why she's not sending her child in and convinces the head that the child is nevertheless receiving the equivalent of an appropriate schooling. But it's a negotiation between the parent and the head teacher. Is that correct interpretation?
That should be the way they deal with it. Unfortunately, the school will follow due process if there isn't that dialogue. That's why we're encouraging parents and schools to reach out and have that discussion and talk about the best way of dealing with that particular issue. I would also, in that scenario, I'd recommend that the parents seek some advice from health colleagues because the transmission rate with children is low. And the current guidance says actually that there is no risk as it currently stands today. Somebody in a household of a family with a vulnerable shielded person does not need to isolate. They can come in and take protective measures when they return about things like changing their clothes when they come in and keeping social distance. That can happen, but that's a very specific case, so I won't comment any further. But dialogue is really key early on as well, so they need to talk to the school.
Yes, thank you. Finally, I think that's very helpful, Jonathan. I think that guidance, those insights, and some of the practicalities should be made more widely available to county councillors and not just the people who have the great privilege and honour to sit on this committee, because it is our 61 county council colleagues who may very well find themselves in a position of being challenged in September about this, and I think some distillation of that for everyone might be appreciated.
Well, John, to plug our training session, but that's in the slides for the training session, Peter. So encourage colleagues to come.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I would encourage colleagues to come, definitely. Wendy, I saw you had your hand up. I guess that John's covered the points you were going to pick up on.
He did. It was the public health. It isn't just public health. I know that our adult social care, if there's a particular vulnerable older person that's living with family members, would offer help and support around infection control. So John's absolutely right. We need to look at it in the widest possible form.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the final question now, because I am mindful of time and we want Lou's report. So, Councillor Every.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to finish this discussion on a positive note, if I may, and to say to John, this is the last time this committee, I think, meets before that people will be going back to school. And I just wanted somehow for you to send our thanks to our teaching staff and our non-teaching staff and your own team for their undoubted professionalism and understanding of how to make a situation work. I have been constantly surprised, although I shouldn't be, about their creativity and their flexibility to try and make things work for the benefit of young people. And that needs to be applauded and that needs to be recognised. And I would like to say a huge thanks if you could possibly relay that back on behalf of us on this committee. Thank you.
I certainly will. Thank you, Councillor Every. That's really kind of you to say.
Totally agree, Liz. Thank you very much for that. And yeah, echo those comments entirely. So thank you. Okay, so we'll move to Lou's report now, the Service Director for Children's Services. Lou, do you want to just take us through the key areas of your report, please?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like very long ago that we had this conversation before, really. So there hasn't been a great deal more to report on. You know, we continue to expect to see our busy time follow on from when the schools return, and not immediately after the schools return, but from around October time, probably. We are continuing to visit children. We are now working through our plan to start getting more and more of our staff into buildings. So we've got a plan around that, we're calling them squads, so that people are coming in and alternating use of buildings, which I think for many of our staff is something they actually are looking forward to. And we're also continuing to try and do as much business as usual work as well in preparation for restarting. And by that, I'm including some of so councillors will remember that we got some funding to ask the organisation ISOS to review some of our edge of care early help services, particularly for vulnerable young people, and that work is continuing. So I won't say anything more. I'll take questions if people have any.
Okay, thank you, Lou. Members, anybody got any specific questions that they want to ask Lou? Lucy.
Thank you. The ISOS report I didn't know about, or I'd forgotten. I would love to see that as soon as you get it, because I know they do fantastic work. On the vulnerable children, just returning to the summer holidays, there is a potential opportunity for us to offer those children activities in the summer holidays that would allow us to see more of them, even if it's, I mean, maybe even better if it's in different buildings from schools or the usual ones. Are we taking any steps to try and offer things that might be attractive so that we can spend some time with some of those young vulnerable families?
We are exploring how to do that, and you know, as I think, I mean, we know that there are some that schools are also commissioning some summer activities. So we're also looking at how we start to open in a kind of hybrid way or more fully some of our children's centres or family centres as well. So we're exploring those kind of activities, absolutely.
Could you get reports out to us as soon as you kind of know what you're doing with that? Because I think we don't have a Children and Young People's Committee for some time now, but it would be, I think it's important for us to know what is available for families.
Yes, I'm sure I can get a briefing paper together for you.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a general question about access, I think, Lou. Because even before COVID came along, there was concern about access to potentially vulnerable children. I mean, one example, which I don't think you cover, is that sometimes children have not been able to have their health inspections, you know, because they haven't been able to get appointments with them, so they haven't been checked up, as young children via the health worker scheme. And I just wondered whether we have got concerns about some children that we may not have been able to reach, either because of difficulty, obviously, of face-to-face and people perhaps not having the technology. I mean, are there any areas that you and the team are really quite concerned about, that there may be children who you have not been able to get access to, who may be very vulnerable, either from a sort of public health point of view, the visiting from public health colleagues, or from our point of view? I just wonder whether you've got any, real concerns there, or whether you think, on the whole, you're managing to keep, tabs on the children that you think we need to keep tabs on.
So I think it's very difficult to know what you don't know. I think that's the fundamental issue. What we have seen is an increase in the number of contacts and referrals about children as time has gone on. So I think in the early stages of the lockdown, I think children were very, very much less visible than perhaps they are now, actually, to be honest. As I said in my preamble, I do think we are going to get a number of more children referred post, and I would say it'll be around October time, because in the first month after schools come to start coming back, teachers will be assessing the situation, be kind of thinking about what might be going on, equally early years settings as well. We have been working with health partners, and we are doing a lot of midwifery services have continued, and the most vulnerable parents to be are continuing to be referred through to our unborn baby panels and all the rest of it. So I think the very most vulnerable children we probably are picking up. I think there will be a group of children who are vulnerable but are not so vulnerable that they've appeared on people's radars at perhaps the time they might otherwise have done. And those are the ones that will come forward and become obvious, as I say, when more and more settings open up in the autumn. I think that's probably the situation. I think at the same time, in terms of our family safeguarding and our work with children who are open to us, that work is taking a bit longer to complete because we're not always able to do the face-to-face work that we want to do. So there will be an impact, but it will come, I think, in the autumn rather than in the summer.
Mm-hmm. And can I just go back on that? I don't know whether, Wendy, we've had several conversations at CYP in the past about, the health visitors not managing to see children at the development points they should do. I just wonder whether Wendy had any information on whether, that's continuing, or whether they've had to put those kinds of visits on hold until, such time as there is allowance of face-to-face visits.
Yeah, I can, Joan. So really, health have done exactly the same as we've done within the local authority. So risk assessed all of their caseload, and where there are concerns, they have done face-to-face, health wearing the proper PPE, but where they can, they have used technology. So exactly the same model that we've used within the local authority. What I do have to say is I sit on the Health and Care Gold Group, which is like the health model for looking at recovery, and they have actually got a strand that's called Children and Maternity, and that's probably the first time in my history I have seen a proper strand that just looks at children and maternity, and I sit on that board as well, and they are certainly very concerned about children and recognise that, particularly around their mental health and emotional well-being, there is going to be an increase in need for services in relation to that. So I'm certainly on that board and championing what we're going to need, as Lou said, probably around about October time. And I'm really happy to add any information I get to Lou's report in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Simon.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. Okay, thank you, Joan. Councillor Hoy.
Yes, I wondered if you could just update us about the outdoor centres a little bit, please, and sort of any plans for the future, because I think it'd be good to make the most of the good opportunities that this is let us have.
So, I mean, I'll start, and then John might want to pick up, because covers across. As you know, we've got one young person currently using Grafton Water, and we've got a number of other young people who are, I mean, a small number, but are accessing some daycare support because their placements or their home arrangements, essentially their child and care placements, have come under a bit of pressure. And that's actually working really well. So really pleased to have had that. I think there is a question of when the outdoor centres are likely to be able to open. And we are therefore thinking or starting to think about how we might make best use of those moving forward, particularly as most children who are currently in shielded groups are no longer going to be in shielded groups moving forward. So we may find that we have some capacity issues in relation to supporting some children, young people with really complex or some complex disabilities who up until now haven't been accessing the regular respite support services because their parents have become very worried about, you know, the possibility of infection. That might mean that we have a bit of a bulge in terms of demand for support in order to support families for those children. And again, I think we should be thinking about how we can use all of our resources creatively around that. John, I don't know if you want to pick up anything more.
Yeah, just to say, obviously, you know, guidance galore. There is some very clear statement about not providing residential school trips in the autumn term. We don't exactly know when that's going to end. So obviously, our current business model around all 3 sites is a residential overnight stay arrangement. So it may be that we continue to offer flexibility, look at more day provision, and obviously the work we've been working on for some time now about reworking the centres, making a slightly different offer, using capacity has continued, and you know I'm still very optimistic about the future of the outdoor centres, and it's just proven how flexible a resource they are to the county. So we'll keep a very close eye and see what that means in terms of the longer term prospects for schools returning and using.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, John and Lou. Councillor Taylor, Simone Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to touch a little bit more on the family safeguarding, because obviously I'm reading here, they're talking about anticipated savings, you know, not being reached. But Lou, have you got any further? Because obviously it's saying that there's challenges in respect of recruiting and training adult practitioners. Is there any sort of like further movement on being able to do this so you can get the family safeguarding sort of more mobile?
So I think that's in the finance report, but I'm happy to answer your question. That's okay. No. I mean, it's obviously been very unfortunate that we've been establishing a brand new model of practice and recruiting lots and lots of staff all at the time of the COVID-19 pandemic hitting. It's you know, you couldn't have predicted it, obviously. Actually, in terms of recruitment, we have managed to fill posts by and large. So that's really positive, actually, and in Cambridgeshire, partly because we learned lessons, because obviously we established the model in Peterborough as part of an earlier wave of pilots. So we learned lessons from there about how to attract people and what kind of people to attract. So we've made firm offers across the piece. We've got 1 or 2 vacancies still in the adult mental health side of things, and I think we've still got 1 probation officer vacancy. Where it's been more challenging is actually getting those people into post because of, you know, it's taken more time for them to go through the leaving and starting process. And it's also been more challenging in terms of offering the training and development that they need. So we've had to do a lot of that virtually. So there has been a delay, but it's not as bad as it could have been, actually. So I think more of the challenge in terms of thinking about looked after children numbers and work in the system has been more about, you know, doing the actual face-to-face work with family members. So a number of our partner agencies have wanted mostly to work virtually, which has worked for some people, but not all. And it has meant that some of the programs have taken a bit longer to complete, which means that it's taken longer to complete the work with the family. in order to either prevent the child coming to care or to get the child back out of care, hopefully safely with the family. So there will be some knock-on effect, but actually the service has done incredibly well and the partners have done incredibly well in getting staff to us. I'm really pleased about it, actually.
Good. That was, I think it must be a duplicate because it is in item 7 as well as the probably financial. Thank you, Lou.
No problem.
Thanks, Mon Taylor. Thank you. Okay, there's nobody else who wishes to speak. I am mindful of the time, so it's been a good discussion on both parts of this report. So I'd just like to say thank you very much to the officers. John Lewis and his team have been working remarkably well and hard, extremely hard during our last report. So thank you very much. And also just to thank Andrew for your contributions from the secondary school point of view. You know, it doesn't go unnoticed. Thank you very much. It's challenging times. And I think we picked up on some good points here. And I think the member briefing training period that we'll have will be very useful and beneficial for us to have further discussion on it. So can I take it as read that we've noted and commented accordingly, and we'll move on to the next item? Okay, we'll move on to agenda item number 8, which is children in care, not in education, employment or training. I just got to go for a little bit of preamble. We will now move to this item. I have accepted this as a late report on the following grounds: to allow the report to contain the most up-to-date information. And the reason for urgency is to enable the committee to be briefed on the current situation in relation to supporting young people in care and care leavers to remain in education, employment and training. There are important outcomes for young people and outcomes that may be adversely affected by continuing impacts of COVID-19. Lou Williams, the Service Director for Children's Services, would you like to introduce the report, please?
Sorry, just moving between screens and unmuting myself. Apologies. Yes, thank you, and apologies for the late submission. I just probably good idea to start with the recommendations, really. So this report was requested by members. It's obviously clearly an area where children and young people, you know, keeping people in employment, education and training is particularly important in relation to supporting a whole host of outcomes that are really lifelong, actually, to be honest. And care leavers and children who have been in care are more likely to struggle to be in employment, education and training because of past adverse experiences or school interruptions or because of emotional mental health difficulties and all the rest of it. So it's an area that's really important that we focus on. Cambridge's performance in relation to young people and not in education, employment and training has historically not been as good as we would want it to be. There are some potential reasons for that, and it hasn't been way out of kilter. It's also an area where we've clearly made some progress over the last couple of years. My concern is that as a group, young people leaving care are probably quite vulnerable to being negatively impacted because of COVID. So if you think of where, and it will be the more vulnerable of that group that will be most likely to be affected. So if you're a high achieving child or young person in care and your plan is to go on to university and all the rest of it, actually you're less likely to be significantly affected. You might be affected a little, but less likely to be significantly affected. But actually, if you're somebody who is going to be trying to get an apprenticeship or perhaps working in lower skilled economy, actually those are the jobs that are more likely to be adversely affected and the opportunities likely to be adversely affected over the next year or so. And that's why I've suggested that you might want to bring back a report in a year's time to look at the impact of that. But I will also provide regular updates as part of my service director reports. And I have, for example, another one of those coming up in either September or October. So I'll make sure that NEAT remains part of that summary report, but you might want to think about having a more detailed report in a year's time just to look at the impact of COVID and, you know, our other factors in hopefully maintaining a positive trend in terms of supporting young people who are in care or leaving care into employment, education and training. I'll stop there. I can see some hands. think you're silenced, Simon.
Oh yeah, sorry, I'm catching the bug of not unmuting myself. Okay, so Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. I found the report very, very useful, Lou, and I wondered whether it would be useful for us to consider these findings alongside the ones for NEETs in the school system in general, because Cambridgeshire in the past has done very well in terms of not having many NEETs, as it were. Therefore, for the general school population, we have been quite successful in getting them into, or keeping them into, education, employment or training. And it just might be useful to look at those two things side by side to see if there are things that we are doing with the general school population that we could perhaps import into those leaving care, or whether in fact that the differences between the two cohorts are so significant that it does require a totally separate kind of program. So I just feel that the two together really would be quite useful, because then we could see whether is COVID-19 impacting generally on young people getting into apprenticeships and other kinds of, as you say, lower paid jobs, or is there a particular problem for individuals who are leaving care? So I think those two, putting them together, I think might give us a bit more insight into what's going on. I don't know whether you would agree with that, but I just think personally it would be quite helpful.
I mean, that might be something that we could do when we bring it back in a year or so, perhaps. They are very, very different cohorts. Apart from anything else, the numbers are very significantly different. We have, you know, the care leaver population is in a few hundred. The numbers of children leaving school each year is obviously much larger than that. And actually, the numbers of children turning 18 each year in Cambridgeshire is fewer than, well, it's probably around 50 or 60. So the numbers are very, very different. But nevertheless, you're right, I think, it is likely to be something that we should look at perhaps at a population level as well as a subset. And it is something that we have to report on. So I'd be happy to do that and make it a joint report with school improvement.
Thank you, because we have had reports in the past about the general school population and NEETs within that. So I think it's just that it would be useful for us to see, because unfortunately, if you take a subset, as you know, sometimes you think COVID-19 has had a huge impact here, when in fact it's had a huge impact everywhere, and they're not a special case. Yeah, thank you.
That's a good point. So we'll look forward to seeing that information. Councillor Every.
Thank you, Chair. With my corporate parenting hat on, they are a special case, I have to say. And we've been trying to get this report for our children in care for a while and have been singularly unsuccessful. And Councillor Hoy will confirm that. And then that report fell foul of COVID. I find this report for our youngsters who are care leavers very disappointing, and I worry for them, because part of our local offer must include their ability to find work and to progress to an independent life. So I'm not happy to wait for a year. I'm quite happy for you to come back to corporate parenting in 6 months, but I want to see an action plan specifically for our young people in care about what's going to happen over the next 6 months. And I'm really pleased, Lou, that you're going to come back and give us reports, but I really want something much more specific for us. And I also don't want to just think about the NEETs from the perspective of their qualifications, because we know that there are issues there. But I also want to look at it from the perspective of the whole local offer that we have there, which includes 2.3 in this report, which says quite blandly, if I may say, that actually it's less effective for those youngsters who have problems with housing, and that is absolutely key. And I would just refer you to the fact that, sorry, no, it's 2.9. Refer you to the fact that we do have a CUSPI research project happening at the moment, which is our Cambridge University postgrad research on actually the local offer and what is important to these young people. And unsurprisingly, what's come out highest of all is, I'm on a roll here, is homelessness and mental health. And these are all linked together. They're not in any kind of isolation. Poor housing, mental health will mean poor qualification, will mean a really poor life start. And this, for some of them, will be the only second start that they're going to have. So please, Lou, thank you. I would like to have an action plan, please, which is specific to our children in care and our care leavers. And if it comes to corporate parenting, that's absolutely fine. But I want to keep tabs on this because this is something which I think is really serious. 1 or 2 years lost for these youngsters is lost forever. They'll never get it back. And we can't afford for our children in Cambridgeshire to lose those couple of years. Really, really passionate about this. Thank you, Chair.
Indeed, and rightly so. So what I hadn't put in the report, but actually I have asked that an action plan is developed. So there is one that's in the process of being developed at the moment. And I can either circulate that as an information item to the members on this committee, or indeed it might be more appropriate that it comes to the corporate parenting committee because you'll have, or both. And you have more time to scrutinise there. Absolutely, I will continue to include neat reporting in relation to young people in care as part of my service director report. I wasn't meaning that I would leave it for a whole year before coming back to look at it. And you're right, of course. You know, one of the challenges for many of our young people do fantastically. It's a bit like looking at, you know, our population of unaccompanied asylum seeking children, young people. Many of those come here really motivated to learn and want to do well and do extremely well. Others, unfortunately, really struggle with the challenges that they've had getting here with you know, sometimes quite really significant abuse, or are challenging or are struggling to get over some of the trauma that caused them to leave. And you know, it's every one of these children, young people is an individual, and actually the way that those factors like mental health, housing, all the rest of it cross over are going to, of course, have an impact on whether that child or young person is able to remain in education, employment and training. So absolutely hear your passion. I think it is absolutely right that we have an action plan, and I would suggest that you would want to see that quite regularly at corporate parenting.
Yes, please. Could I just ask another question, Chair, if I may, but I'm not going to ask Lou, I'm going to ask Andrew. I don't know whether you can ask committee members about this, but the virtual school is mentioned, and he's chair of the board of the virtual school, is mentioned regarding discussions with youngsters who are currently NEETs. One of the action points on this is actually starting to look for year 9 children who are who are likely to go down that path of year 9. And I think the virtual school is key to this. And I'm just I know they are involved, and they haven't been involved up to 18 before, but they are now. But it's really key to me that that the virtual school has a huge input into this. Can I ask Andrew that question?
Yeah, Andrew, come in, please, because it's for the benefit of members.
As you know, Councillor Every, the virtual school management board meets regularly to and is actually very grateful for the local authority for increased investment in the staffing of the virtual school team. But I was just making a note myself here to make sure that as an agenda item on the next virtual school management board meeting, that I raise it with the virtual virtual school head teacher. I know she's aware of the challenges ahead, and but any closer working can only be a good thing. So yeah, I agree. It's an important point to make.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just before I invite Lucy to come in, I just want to pick up for Tamar's benefit, really, just that if we can make an action just to follow up those points there, why for circulation for CYP and the Corporate Parenting Board, and also for regular updates from Lou in relation to that on a quarterly basis. So if we could just make a note of that so it doesn't fall through the cracks in the pavement, so to speak. Okay, so thank you, Liz. That's really good points you've made there. Lucy, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you. I absolutely agree with everything Liz has said about how important that these children are special. We have a very specific responsibility to these children, and I absolutely agree that we need to be following this up really urgently. And I'm glad that the report does need related to all members and not just to the Corporate Parenting Board. I think this is something that we all need to take responsibility for. I also take the point very much about each child being or young person being an individual, and that they're different. I mean, some of them do fantastically well, others of them it's more difficult, and sometimes it just takes longer. And I think that's the bit I wanted to pick up. there's an assumption that all children will be, I mean, it's compulsory that all children will be in education or training up until 18. I think for some of these children, being in education for longer than 18, even if it's not at university level, would be enormously valuable. So my question is how much we're working closely with particularly FE colleges to try and keep as many of these children in kind of in education. I mean, we can't create jobs for them necessarily, but we can work with our partner institutions to make sure that they stay in education for as long as is feasible. So are we doing that? How are we doing that? And are there financial barriers to some of them staying in education for longer?
So we work very closely with FE colleges actually, and there are a number of programs that FE colleges put forward. As I say, you've got one group of young people who you know, are going to do well in FE and higher education and all the rest of it. We provide support. I think there's, I mean, one of the reasons why, and it's that the reporting, the statutory reporting hasn't really kept up with this. But, you know, we now have an obligation to support all care leavers up to the age of 25. And some of that is about recognising that actually having them in education at 16, 17, 18, it's not the right time for them. They need to perhaps restart education at a later date, and we absolutely would support them to do that. I'm just looking at Lucy and I can see it looks as though she's frozen. So you are there.
She's still here. I think
I'm still here.
you've
You look as if you're frozen
Lou,
from my end.
Oh, do I?
I can hear you.
Okay, so something it's about, you know, and that's, so every care leaver has a pathway plan that covers on an individual basis things like access to education, access to employment, access to training. And sometimes actually what you're talking about is giving people some taster opportunities. So actually the partnership we have with Timpson's, for example, is really positive. So they're only very short tasters, but it gives people an opportunity just to see what the world of work is like, you know, and you have to go at the young person's speed, really. I think that's the key. I'm not aware of blocks that, you know, and certainly if people come to me in relation to looking at funding or wanting to seek additional funding for individual care leavers around access to education, if there is an issue like that, we will find the money for those individuals.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
Thanks, thank you. Councillor Simon Taylor.
Thank you. Let me just find the report. Yeah, actually just touched on the bit that I was going to talk about, 2.12 with the partnership with Timpson's, and also it says partner companies. Are you allowed to sort of say what other partner companies these are, and also how much sort of work is being used to establish any more? I mean, obviously I know with the current climate and people losing their jobs, has there been any more sort of ways of establishing partnerships with other companies like Timpson's and obviously other partners which haven't been named? Also, totally agree with you in respect of care leavers not knowing what they want to do, and it's not just care leavers, it's you know, it's children in families as well. I didn't go back into education till I was 24. So yeah, absolutely. These testers are brilliant for them. Yeah, if you could answer a little bit more about what establishments we could offer, that'd be great.
Of course, so the I think it is Timpson and Partners, the name of the firm, as opposed to other. So I think there's an umbrella. So Timpson have some other companies, so they offer. So that's what that's meaning. We have. I mean, we were starting to talk to chambers of commerce and things like that, and we have a specific person in a personal advisor who's got a specific function around supporting care leavers and access to employment and so forth. And we were starting to have conversations with a number of organisations around, again, doing some supported work environment, really, some supported work. And we have been, I don't have the figures on the top of my head, but we've also been exploring apprenticeships for some young people. So we have a range of things that are happening. I would like more to be happening, and I think, you know, that's where I'm anxious about the impact of COVID, because as you just said, I think a lot of firms could be, they could be retrenching to their sort of core activities. So we just need to make sure that we keep the relationships with them going, I think. So I will certainly, again, in the action plan, I think there is discussion about how we're doing that, but I'll check, and if it's not in there, I'll make sure it is by the time.
Lou, could I just come in here on this point, and Liz may even want to interject as well, but just before COVID, we'd had a business seminar set up. There was lots of businesses going along, and myself and Liz were going to go and talk in relation to engaging with businesses within Cambridgeshire. But unfortunately, COVID came along and we had to cancel it. It's still in the pipeline. We're still trying to keep that, you know, keep it warm with the businesses. Obviously, they're facing challenges as much as we are. So, you know, it is on our agenda to do that, because you're absolutely right. We need to engage businesses. We need to engage corporate colleagues around the county to do that. And, you know, as soon as we can, as soon as the situation allows us to do that, we'll get it back on the radar and push for that. So you've made a really good point, but it is something we're very keen to try and do. So Liz, do you want to add?
Yes, if I could just add that we have a pilot going on where we have 10 youngsters from CRC who we have now got business mentors for. So these are people who come from business, so they have a slightly different background from the kind of support that maybe these youngsters have had in the past. They have all been trained. Our business mentors have all been trained, and I'm really pleased to see that Simon is one of them, and he has been matched with his mentee, and he will be able to feedback just how successfully this pilot works. But the idea is to roll it out as part of the local offer, that eventually every youngster who is a care leaver has a business mentor.
That's great. Can I just ask a supplementary question on that? Is CCC involved in that? Do we offer these taster courses as well for them? I know that obviously we do apprenticeships, but
they're usually done through the FE colleges. But we're trying to build up these links that we have with our businesses, so that actually we can also get youngsters to have more than just courses, but be able to work shadow, get some limited work experience, and so on. So there is a program of employability that they can access as part of their entitlement within their local offer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Whitehead waiting to come in, but Wendy, I just see your hand's gone up. Is it something you want to talk in relation to this?
Yes, just to say that we provisionally rebooked the event with businesses in April. So we've actually rebooked it. We're looking then, because obviously people need to have advance notice.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Wendy. Okay, Councillor Whitehead.
Well, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back on a point that Lou made, which we often tend to forget when we're talking about these issues, is that many of the individuals in care, when they leave care, and we've got the statistics up on the board here, do very well. You know, there are children in care who do extremely well, get very good qualifications. And that did remind me of a project I directed when I was at the University of Cambridge, which was looking at ethnic minority students in the university, who as a group tend to do less well than white students. But what I did in this project was not to compare different ethnic groups with one another, but to look within ethnic group. Because again, there were individuals, Afro-Caribbean background, Asian background, who did extremely well in the university system, but there were others who did less well. And what I concentrated on was, are there differences within group that we can identify, which might help us to understand why some individuals from, say, an Afro-Caribbean background do extremely well and others do less well, and similarly for Asian background. And that was very, very useful, because you were able to identify just 2 or 3 really significant differences between those two groups. And they were really quite practical things which the university could then do something about to help those. And I just wondered, Lou, if that's an angle worth pursuing with our care leavers. You said some of them are very successful. Are there key things we can identify that make them different from the ones who struggle more? And therefore, can we identify something that we can do very, very specifically to help those that struggle more? And I just wondered if that's a possibility to actually look at the data we've got and see if we can identify differences within group in that way, but maybe we can identify where to target the help that they might need most effectively.
I'm sure there is. I mean, I think one of the key issues, to be honest, is actually things like length of time in care and stability of placement is one of the absolute kind of key linkages, actually. So children who come into care relatively younger and spend time in a good foster placement and don't move will be the ones that will tend to do best at the end of the process. The ones that don't come to our attention, or perhaps have moved into the country. Certainly with my Peterborough hat on, that happens quite a bit because there's a lot of mobility in Peterborough. So you'll find older young people who've had really chaotic parenting that we only get to find at 15 and who come into the care. So they are the ones that are going to struggle most. But it's absolutely worth doing, I think. Bearing in mind that, as I said before, it's quite a small population each year. So you do have that, but I think we could certainly look at that and try and understand. And actually also talk to young people, which we do as part of the pathway planning process, but perhaps more systematically about what would have helped them at those difficult points.
Because I think the stability of placement we've mentioned in a number of contexts. I know we work very, very hard to do that, but maybe it is something that we really, really do need to target to try our best to make sure that individuals have a stable background, which is clearly going to help them. Yes, what you just said.
Yes, the challenge, as I say, is where you have a family that's perhaps moved in. You have lots of mobile families that sometimes are highly mobile because they are avoiding people looking too closely at what's going on in their family households, or sometimes it's just that they're mobile because that's the reality of their life. In terms of being evicted for not paying rent and re-establishing themselves somewhere else, and so we may not find out about the harm that a young person is suffering until much later in their chronological time. Those are the ones that tend to do least well. I think for me, a big part of this, and unfortunately, because of the cohorts being small, the evaluation of family safeguarding wasn't really able to say too much about educational outcomes, but it was finding that, addressing the challenges for families in a real way, so mental health difficulties, domestic abuse and substance misuse, and solving those within the family was having a positive impact on educational outcomes as well, although they couldn't quite quantify that. And I guess that's also for me a big part of what we need to do, because children in care are always a very small, they're the smallest bit of the population, if you like. There's a much bigger population of children who are in families, and they're going to stay in families, and the more that we can do to also support them means that they also benefit, hopefully, from being in education, employment and training in the longer term as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lou. Okay, so I'm going to move to the recommendations now. I'll just read them out to you because given what Councillor Every said, that the first one is to note the progress being made in supporting more of our young people to remain in education or move into employment and training, and B, request a further report on the progress made and any ongoing impact of COVID-19 in this area for September 2021 Children and Young People's Committee. Given the conversations that have taken place today, we've obviously got the regular updates coming from Lou, but I'm just thinking September 2021 is a considerable distance away. It is more than 12 months away. So do we want to be more specific in relation to recommendation B, that we want it this time next year, 12 months, for example? Would members be more content with that in July next year as opposed to September?
It did cross my mind it was a long time, but I was quite happy that Lou said that we would have interim, we would have updates. I'm easy either way.
A part of the reason, if I can just explain, part of the reason for thinking about it being September, but it does cut both ways, to be honest. Because of where the school year ends, you tend to have a bit of an impact in June, because most children are, most young people, the way that eat and NEAT kind of peaks and fluctuates through the year, you know, we can certainly bring it back in June. It's up to committee clearly.
Well, I'll ask committee because I don't want to add confusion. So unless anybody's objecting to the recommendations as presented, if everybody's happy, if anybody's against that, then raise their hand now. There's 2 hands raised now, Councillor Hay and Lucy. If you could just remove them. Right. Okay. So Lucy, what are you proposing?
I would like us to have have it noted that we will have a report back before that. I know Lou's said it, but I think it would be helpful to have it in the recommendation. So could we say we'd have an interim report in, say, February, and then we can have the one when we've got the school results in September, as Lou suggested?
Look, I'm chairman, I'm comfortable with that. It's what this committee wants to do. So is anybody happy to propose that and support it?
I'm happy to support that. I think that's a really good idea that Councillor Nelson has just said. Yes, I would be happy to do that, provided we have something in February. That's great.
I've got a kind of variant on that, Simon. I think it is worth remembering, of course, in 2021, May 2021, the council changes because we're all out and there are elections. And therefore, I think this committee would like to see something before it stops to be this committee. I mean, maybe everybody else is restanding. I certainly.
Okay, then. So
February, March would be quite good.
Okay, so in relation to recommendation, I'll just read out something that's in my head then, and if you're all in agreement, we can. So request a further report on the progress made on any ongoing impact to COVID-19 in this area for the February 2020 Children and Young People's Committee. Would that be better?
2021, Simon.
Sorry, 2021. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So yeah, next year, basically February next year. Tamar, have you got enough wording for that? If that's the case, then I'll take the recommendation on block as amended. If anybody wants to abstain or vote against that, just raise your hands now. Okay, I'll take that as carried then. So thank you very much. Thank you, Lou, for your time in this. Thank you. We'll move on to, we've got Tom waiting patiently now. So we'll move on to agenda item number 9, which is a finance monitoring report. Tom, there's the head of finance. Would you introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon. I'm conscious under the current protocol, much of the report is for information rather than decision, but just to draw attention to 2 or 3 things. So firstly, on page 17, the committee will notice, well, first of all, that a number of the income generating services are back financially under this committee's remit. Of course, I think there's been a lot of ongoing attention, but they had been reported through to C&I, whereas this financial year back with CYP. And because of some of the issues we've already heard about as a result of the pandemic, there are those pressures reported on income on outdoor centres and Cambridgeshire Music, and a different sort of income pressure on the attendance service as well, summarised on page 17 due to the fines matter. Going on through that, we see there are opening pressures as well, not related to the pandemic, on home to school transport special, a result of additional demand and the cost of transport and the complexity of need. That really is a window on the issue that's well known to the committee about the wider pressures on the dedicated schools grant, and we see that in this report as well, with a forecast deficit for the year of 12.4 million for the high needs block of dedicated schools grant. Some progress being made as reported on the behaviour attendance improvement partnerships and a reduction in spend in that area, but nevertheless a serious deficit that in common with many councils needs further national attention. Just moving on through the report, page 25 provides the summary across the piece for people and communities. So you've got on page 24 the summarised position at a pressure of 11.6 million, of which 10.4 million, 10.5 million at the top of page 25 is a result of COVID-19 spend. It's important to say that the unring fence grant we've got isn't played into these figures as yet. due to the amount of uncertainty. At this time, GPC is recognising that upside from the grant and offsetting that against the pressures that are held in individual committees. And then it's Appendix C to this report, I think through on something like page 46 or 47, that sets out the changes in the capital programme that are recommended or proposed for a recommendation here through to GPC. Two columns of numbers. The first column sets out where there are changes in the timing of delivery of schemes, so the 2021 changes. And then the second column is overall changes in scheme costs. So one is just a matter of timing, whereas the second column is costs overall. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. And before I open it up, just want to bring members' attention to the outdoor centres. It is a challenge. I just want to let you know that I have regular meetings with the centre managers. We're meeting we met this month. We have a regular board meeting to look at the challenges and some of the scenarios that are panning out as we go into sort of August and September, really. And we've touched on it with Lou and John in relation to our children in care and the opportunities that lie there. So there's a lot of monitoring going on. There are issues like lots of other services as a result of COVID, but the teams are working extremely hard to try and mitigate the pressures and get ready for when we can literally hit the ground running again when we know we're more safe to do so, and the guidance allows us to do that. So that's just a comment on the outdoor education from my point of view, because I'm, as you know, quite closely involved in it. Councillor Netzinger, do you want to come in?
Thank you. Thank you for the report, Tom. It's very thorough, and there's a huge amount of information in there, and it's clearly a situation that's changing quite rapidly. And lots of it is so the outdoor centres is a big overspend, but it's absolutely clear why there's that big overspend, and it's one of those issues that we clearly need to be making the case to central government that this is money that would have come in and hasn't, and it must be kind of dealt with in as part of the national pandemic. The figure that I was very surprised to see how large it was is the 0 to 19 organisation and planning, £197,000 overspend, and then it talks about that being about the decision not to issue penalty fines or initiate legal proceedings on parents. I'm hoping that figure doesn't represent how much we normally get in from fines, because if it is, I'm horrified. So if we could have a little bit more explanation of that, I'd be very grateful.
Happy to come in, Chair, if that's helpful.
Yeah, go on, John, if it's easier, please do.
Yeah. Lucy, unfortunately, that is the situation. You know, majority of our fines relate to parents taking holidays in term time. You know, we have a very strict line in relation to that children don't learn whilst on holiday. They learn in the classroom in front of a teacher. So these are what schools have referred to through to us, and this is the part year effect where we've been unable to collect that income. Obviously, it's weighted more towards the summer term because that's when most of the holidays happen, but they do directly relate to income we receive from fining parents.
Wow. I remain horrified because I don't think that's an appropriate way for us to be making money, but thank you.
Well, can I just be clear? It doesn't generate us money. It funds the service to do the work. So there's obviously legal costs associated with it, and people we need to employ to undertake the legal process. So it's not a profit-making organisation. We don't make a profit on it. It just subsidises the costs we have to run the service.
Okay, thanks, John. Any other members want to comment on the paper? No? Okay, just give me a second while I just get to the recommendations. Okay, so I can't see anybody else who wants to comment, so we'll move to the recommendations as you see it. We'll take them on block, unless you object to the recommendations on block. If you could raise your hand and just let me know. If not, I'll take it as a unanimous agreement for the recommendations as tabled in agenda item 9. Okay, so there's no one objecting to that, so we'll take them as passed. So thank you very much, Tom, for coming along today and waiting patiently. So thank you. Okay, we'll now move to agenda item number 10, which is the agenda plan, appointments and training plan. Would the Democratic Service Officer update the committee on any changes to the published agenda plan?
I'm not aware of any changes to the published agenda plan, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. It is a moving feast at times, but we'll liaise with lead members if there are any significant changes. There are no changes to the committee appointments. The committee training plan is attached for noting, and we've obviously added John's training part to that today. So that's it. So the reserved committee date of the 11th of August is not required. So the committee will next meet on Tuesday, the 15th of September. You will get a circulated COVID report in August. If you have questions or you'd like to comment, please circulate or respond by email to myself or Lou or John. But we're due to have a remote meeting. I know it was listed as East Cambridgeshire, but we'll be remotely having the meeting. Joan, would you like to just come in before I close the meeting?
Yes, thank you. There was this talk about Jonathan doing this training session for us before September. Is it possible to try and arrange a date for that? Which was about the starting school and or is he just going to send us a PowerPoint?
Yeah, so Joan, what the plan is, John, you can interject in a sec, but the plan is to get something in the diary in the next couple of weeks. So we're briefed before September, so it's much more useful for us then. I mean, it would be foolish for us to come back after September. So absolutely. John and I will liaise with Democratic Services. We'll try and get a date. Obviously, we'll probably not be able to accommodate everybody, but we'll try and get a date that's as accommodating as possible for that. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the time's now 15:47. I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Chair.